Tov. Today's daf is Lamed Gimel. We're still catching up a little bit. We're on Lamed Bet, Lamed Bet. I'm a Rav Ashi. It is about 10 lines from the top, end of the line. The line starts with Afilu Hachi Heater Me'avid Lebai. Okay, so this is the whole question about can a Rav be mochel on his kavod? Can a father be mochel on his kavod? The answer is yes. Can a Rav be mochel on his kavod? That was somewhat debated because the Rabbi is representing the kavod of the Torah. And maybe even if he doesn't mind personally, people have to show him respect because otherwise it would be disrespecting the Torah that he represents. And nevertheless, the Gemara can conclude, which is actually a very powerful statement about the nature of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the personal relationship and investment, that it becomes your Torah. So you actually have an identification with it and an ownership with it, which in an interesting and a fascinating way doesn't just mean you can stake your claim and your connection, but it also puts you in a position to say, I'm okay if you don't sort of show me, kavod, even though I'm also representing Torah, which demands kavod. But because I now have an ownership stake in it. And the conclusion of the Gemara was that even after Rav is mochel on his kavod, okay, people should still do some type of a sign of respect. So that was the last line we left off with yesterday. Afilu hider mi'avid le'boy. They should have shown him some form of hadarta, right? We've been talking kavod, but we're going to get to the pasuk of hadarta b'nei zakein, which is honor to an older person, which is interpreted as honor to a sage, is how it's going to be interpreted. So they still have to do some sign of respect. Rambam leaves it generic, as they have to show him hidur. He says you could be mochel on your kavod, and technically they're exempt, but they're still obligated. They're like exempt and obligated. They still have a need to demonstrate some form of respect. And Rashi actually says linoa ma'at kilu rotza lamod mipanav. So if anybody's ever been to the yeshiva and knows the whole thing about the tush move, which is you sort of raise your tush a little halfway off the seat or whatever, that actually according to Rashi is what the Gemara is here saying, that even if the Rebbe doesn't want everybody to stand fully for them, it's actually striking this balance. It's enough his Torah that he could be mochel on the full sign of respect, but at the end of the day, whatever he's mochel or not, he still represents Torah. And you can't allow somebody who represents Torah to not have any respect, any sign of respect shown towards that person. And this embodies that balance. It demands respect, but it's clear that he's mochel, so it does not have to be the full amount. And that's the conclusion of the Gemara. So now the Gemara continues. Amar Rav Ashi, says Rav Ashi, afilu l'man damar Rav Ashi kvodo machul, even if the one who says that his kavod is forgiven, is waived the honor, he can waive the honor, but nasi shemachal kvodo ein kvodo machul. A person who is a nasi, which is like the prince, but it meant a very, very specific role of the exilarch in Eretz Yisrael, which was an interesting combination, by the way, of both political leadership and rabbinic leadership, which was the role that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi played, and his descendants in Bavel, they were separated, right? There was not somebody who was both a political and a religious head, but in Eretz Yisrael there was. That person cannot be mochel on his kavod. So it could be the combination of the two, political and religious leadership, but it seems that the Gemara is making more of a shift in contrast to the specific issue of political leadership. That, and we'll see about that in a minute, that there's a need of, this also does fit into the whole Kibud Rav Ve'ein issue in general, which the issue of Kibud Rav does, and the idea of Melech. All of these are institutions of authority. So you have to. There's God. The Gemara compared it to honor of God, honor of parents, honor of Torah, or honor of a Rebbe. That the idea of what society has these institutions of authority, which are central to the way it's it's structured, and that's important to be acknowledged and respected. So it seems that the issue here about the Nasi is that even if there's some degree that individuals can waive that honor due to them, right? Nevertheless, like the institution of the fundamental institution of authority, right? That you're subject to the rules of the land and, to the leader of the land and so on, that fundamentally is too deeply of a demand in terms of the society, what that represents in terms of the society, that a person cannot choose to be like a mochel on that. Okay, so now the Gemara says, continuing with that theme, let's take a look. I'll ask you on this. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Tzadok, that all these rabbis were reclining and eating in the wedding feast or whatever, in some type of a Beis Hamishta Rami, Benosh Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi. Rabbi Gamliel made a mashkelem, and Rabbi Gamliel was there pouring the drinks. We've seen from the previous stories that apparently that's something that the host would do. But even if it's something that the host would do, nevertheless, it's a degree of mechila on their kavod. If you're holding by your honor, then you're not the one pouring drinks for somebody else. Nasana goes to Rabbi Eliezer. He gave the coast to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer refused to accept it, and as we're going to see, he refused to accept it because he said it's not appropriate for me to accept the service of the Nasi. So even it's not even just inferring from this action that we can therefore not show him respect elsewhere. Even in the very action in which he is being mochel in his kavod, I cannot participate in that. I cannot allow, the Nasi to play this type of subservient role, towards me. He's the one that has to be held in the higher esteem. Nastal Rabbi Yoshua. So then Rabbi Gamliel gave the cup to Rabbi Yoshua, the kibbelah, and he accepted it. Amalo Rabbi Eliezer wrote, so Rabbi Eliezer said, Maze Yoshua. What is this you're doing, Yoshua? Ani Yoshvim, Rabbi Gamliel, Ominu Mashkalenu. We should sit and have Rabbi Gamliel, the Nasi, coming and serving and attending to us? That's not appropriate. Even if he's willing to do it, we shouldn't be willing to do it. Amar Lei, so Rabbi Yoshua said back to him, Matzinu Gadol Mimenu. No, we've seen one even greater than Sheshimesh. Avram, if you want to read the parentheses, Avram Gadol Mimenu v'Shimesh. Avram was greater than him, and he attended to his guests. Avram Gadol Adoraya, he was the great of the generation. Because of Bo, who made Alehem, he was standing over them, over the angels, and serving them. Maybe it's because he knew they were angels. No, he appeared to them like Arabs. So even though he welcomed his guests, he attended to his guests. We won't have Gamliel, so there and attending to us and pouring us drinks. Now, of course, the difference could be made. Avram was a gadol ador. It didn't mean he was a nasi. Right, it does get to the question of what is the type of, right, it's not just how great a person is, but if it's specifically about the role of holding political authority, right, then that was not a reality with Abraham. But anyway, that was the response he had.
He was certainly the political authority of the house of Abraham.
That's true, but then you could say that it could also be true about an avshamachlok photo, right? Within his house.
That was the whole Am Yisrael. That was the whole body of Israel.
I see. You don't mean physically that. You mean like the house. You have the household. Like he represented the head of the head of the clan of Israel. Oh, okay, I see that. That's an interesting point. Of course, the people that he was attending to were not part of his clan. It's not an exact comparison. Anyway, I'm gonna let Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Tzadok said. He was sitting there among them. Obviously, there's a little irony here because we're talking about being mochel on the kavod, and is that acceptable or not? And he's saying actually, by using the example of Avraham, you are actually giving, ironically, more respect. You're being mochel on God's kavod. You're giving more respect to Avraham and using him as the example when you should be using God as the example. Okay, why should you be using God as the example? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Think about what God does. Because of the wind to blow and the clouds to rise from the ground. Umoi matan brings the rain down. Umatzmiach adaman causes the ground to sprout forth. V'orech shulchan lifnei kol echad ve'echad, and God lays out the table, like He prepares the food for every creature. Right? Think about God. He's the farmer, and He's the he waters the crops, and whatever. He does all this work to make everybody have their food. So if God provides for every human being, we can't let Him, just serve us and attend to us. So anyway, there they use that as an example. God certainly is the example of like political authority, right? And nevertheless, that's not a compromise to God's authority. Now, the interesting thing about this is that then an evidence that you could be mochel on your kavod, or is that saying this is not an act of mechilat kavod, right? That actually, because Rabbi Gamliel is sort of, being like God, Valachta bidrachav, he's acting in a way that God like to take care of people's needs, right? Or maybe it's, saying that that when somebody takes care of the needs of people below him, that should not be interpreted as a mechil of the kavod. There's other things maybe that are mochel of kavod, but this isn't one of them, This you can allow yourself to be served, right? So again, it's not an exact comparison. is the Avram exactly comparable to the idea of Nasi? Although Doe makes a very good point in terms of the head of the Abrahamic clan, but also, right, the question could be what types of things you interpret as a compromise of kavod. Okay, it seems that the whole point is this does not compromise somebody's kavod, which is a different question than if somebody says it's okay to do something that compromises on my kavod. Can you go ahead and do it, right? Anyway, but the Gemara takes this as evidence. Thank you, that a Rav can be that a Nasi can be mochal kavodo, and the Gemara concludes Elei marhachi mar. If it was said, here's how it was said. I'm a Rabbi Ashi. Even in the Nasi can be mochal in its kavodo. Melech shemachal kavodo ein kavodo machul. A king cannot. Okay, shenemar sum tasim alecha melech shadei and masalech. You shall place upon you a king. The sense of upon you means that it has to be always over you, and therefore the king's fear has to constantly be over you. And again, you could sort of speak about the benefit of the society of having the sense of law and order, and it's not something that can be violated, and you cannot treat the authorities lightly and so on. So there's obviously even aren't there special prison terms and sentences for people that assault a cop, right, as opposed to assaulting somebody else, right? So what? MTA worker, right? Really? Okay, so you need certain people like this, that cannot be compromised, right? It's like when they say in Pirkei Avot, you should always be mitpalel l'shalom shamachus, because if it was not for the fear of the government, everybody would be anarchy. Everybody would consume their neighbor, right? So it's deeply necessary for society that not be compromised. And again, maybe the idea that Nasi was different was that maybe that was a little bit more, persuasion than authority. Anyway, it's interesting why exactly, what is it, because it's connected to Torah, but Nasi is different. Melech is something that cannot be compromised. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. Tana Rabbanan. Now that we've discussed kavod of the Rav, but we haven't really mentioned the biblical basis for that. So we're now going to turn to the psukim that serve as the basis for this. So let's take a look. Tanu Rabbanan, mitnei seva takum, right? That darta b'nei zakein. Yareitem elokech ani Hashem. So rise up before the hoary head, for the white-haired person, and you shall show honor to the elderly. I am God. So that's going to turn into, it sounds like respect of people of old age, which will be a debate, but it's going to turn into most immediately respect of a Torah sage. Okay, so Yachal afilu mipnei zakein ashma'ai. Maybe it means even a elder who Rashi says is a wicked elder, but Tosu says more neutrally, just a elder who's an ignorant elder, like a non-scholar, a non-sage. Some illiterate elder. Talmud Lomar zakein. So it says the end. It starts with seva, which emphasizes the age, white-haired. But then it says the zakein. Zakein means something else. The ein zakein el chacham. Zakein means a sage. Am esvali shivim ish miziknei Yisrael. And the end of the pasuk is shehem. What is it? Shehem. What's the end of the pasuk? Esvali shivim ish miziknei. Shehem. What? Chachmeis. What is it? Ashir datiki heim. Something. Now I'm blanking on the end of the pasuk. Okay, so really, but then no, that would show that wouldn't really. How would that show you that they're chachamim? Hold on. Shotrav is chachamim.
Well, maybe it's from the Asher Yadata.
Oh, Asher Yadata, because if it was just about being old, then it wouldn't be that that could be. Yeah. All right, but maybe you're right. Maybe it's the Asher Yadata. So somehow that signifies that they are not just old, but hold positions of authority and maybe of wisdom and knowledge. Okay, so therefore Zakein means also a sage. And therefore, even seva means a sage. So it's not about the elderly; it's about the sage. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Ein zakein el misha chana chachma. Zakein means somebody who acquired wisdom, and Rashi says it's actually a play on words. Ze kaneh. This one acquired kana, who acquired wisdom. So it means a sage. Shenemar Hashem kanani reshit darko. The emphasis on kinyan. God, and this is Torah talking or wisdom talking. God has possessed me or created me, the first of God's paths, Okay, so anyway, so it seems like he's agreeing. He's just quoting another pasuk. The Gemara will actually say that there's an important difference between those two opinions. So the Gemara says, so the Braita continues. Maybe you should stand up when he's far away. It says you should rise before the white-haired and show honor to the elderly. Now, what we're going to do is, right, you could have said, there are two different categories. There's people maybe that are old that you rise before, and there's people that are zakein, that are Torah sages, that you do something else called hidur. You could have said that. But what we're going to do is we're going to conflate everything. We're going to say, no, zakein really illustrates what seva is, and we're only talking about Torah sages. And hadarta illustrates what takum means. And we're really all talking about one type of person and one type of action. Okay? So we're conflating everything. So maybe standing up is from a distance. Talmud lomar takum v'hadarta. We read those two words together. I'm sorry, that's lo lomar kima ela b'makom lo lomar kima ela b'makom shidur. Kima is in a way that shows honoring. If you stand up when the person is 100 feet away, that's not the same honoring as when the person moves directly into your, like we're going to see later, 4 amot, directly into your zone, and you stand up for them. That's a much greater show of honor and respect. Okay, so Kima is modified by Vahadarta. Now let's look at it the other way. Does Hadarta exist independent of Kima? Is there a way you show honor and respect, without standing up? Maybe it means that you honor the person by lavishing them with gifts. Okay, maybe that's the Vahadarta. Tamagomar takum Vahadarta. It's the same way rising up is a way, is nothing that costs you any money. It's a way of showing respect. It's not maybe limited to rising, how you talk to them, other forms of demonstrating your respect for them, but not something about lavishing them with gifts, not something that costs you any money. Okay, so now we have takum is modified by vahadarta. It's a rising that shows respect. Hadarta is modified by takum. There are other ways you show respect, but they don't have to be ways of spending money. Now, maybe if you're in the bathhouse, you have to stand up when a Torah sage enters. Okay, again, hadarta is modifying takum. In a place where it's sort of a certain, hidur is a society. I mean, look, there could be issues where nobody is around and you don't talk to somebody in a disrespectful way, which doesn't have to do with how it's sort of positioned within society. It's just totally interpersonal. But nevertheless, hidur to a large degree is also a sort of a societal reality, right? About, so in a certain type of a societal context in which an act would be sort of like, I'll tell you another halacha. The halacha is like, ein mechabdin b'beit hakisei. Right, so you walk, you go to the bathroom and you come at the same time with your Rabbi. You say, no, you go first. So what you could say, I don't know. It doesn't seem totally absurd to me, but at a certain point, it's like in that context, everybody is somewhat, reduced to their basic, most sort of fundamental, human nature, very, very, and therefore it's not about societal standing and position that exists, in that type of, within that context. So therefore, that's not an appropriate place to be showing respect. I guess there's, greater equality there. So the Gemara says, maybe you should close your eyes, pretend you don't see him. Okay, and as long as I didn't see him, I don't have to rise before him. You should, at the end of the pasuk, you should fear God. So why do you have to fear God? Everybody can see whether you're showing respect or not. So it's to show you davar hamasr lelei, something that is only something that God could know. So if you're closing your eyes and pretending you don't see him, but God knows that you do see him, obviously you've done something wrong. Okay. So only something that is given over to the heart, is there something that you have to fear God about? How do you know that the zakein has a responsibility not to cause, make other people have to bear the burden of showing him respect? That he should try to minimize, the responsibility on other people. The elder person has to fear God. And we're going to see that means is like you don't necessarily, you maybe if you can walk in a way that you don't have to walk into a crowded room and everybody's going to have to stand before you, so better to avoid that, right? Which is an interesting compromise from the earlier discussion about being mochel on your kavod. This isn't being mochel on your kavod. It's just, understanding that why not putting people in a position that they have to, be forced to do this for me. Okay. Easy ben Yehuda says, he says, no, seva means any person of white haired, any older person. It is a respect of old age. It's not limited to respect of sages. Okay, so that's the end of the bright. Now the Gemara goes back. So in terms of who's included, we have the first position that says elder, wise men, sages, because it says, that was the then we have Rabbi Yossi Aglili who says Misha Kana Chachma, which sounds to be the same idea. And then you have what's his name? You have Isi ben Yehuda who says it even includes just an older person, period. So now the Gemara says like this. Okay, Rabbi Yossi Aglili Hainu Tanakama. Isn't Rabbi Yossi Aglili who says Zeh Kana Chachma the same as the Tanakama who says Ziknei Yisrael? The Gemara says no. Ikabino Yonit v'Chachim. The difference is when the Tanakama says that you have to be a sage, he's saying that in addition to being an elderly person, so therefore it's like it's not enough that you're a seva. You also have to be a sage. It's an older person who is a sage, but if you have a young person who's a sage, for the Tanakama that's not obligated in respect. Tanakama Savar Yanik v'Chakim, a young person who's a sage, low, is not obligated. It's only seva plus zakein. And Rabbi Yossi Aglili Savar, no, afilu Yanik v'Chachim, no, even just having great wisdom and knowledge, that suffices. My time with Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Why does he say that? That zakein is enough without the seva. He'll tell you, if you think like it's like the Tanakama says. Just combine them all. Say from an elderly, sage, you should rise up and show honor. Why did the Torah separate seva from zakein? To tell you the high love high, the high love high, that they're separate categories. Now, of course, if they're separate categories, you would think logically that he would also say that somebody who's just old and not a sage. Either one suffices, which is a very reasonable read of the pasuk. But both Rashi and Tosfos say, and then he also is the position of this Isi ben Yehuda. Rashi and Tosfos, for various reasons, recognize that that's a reasonable read of the Gemara, but they resist that read. They somehow say, according to him, well, once we've separated them, we understand that zakein is enough by itself, just to be a sage. And when zakein is enough to be itself, just to be a sage, that's what seva means. So at the end of the day, they are just one category. But they're one category that gets sort of reduced to zakein. Seva doesn't mean anything for him. Okay, so that's the way Rashi says, although reasonably you could read it, that there are two categories, elderly and sage, and each one is completely independent of the other. But the Chachamim say you have to have both. Okay, so the Gemara says, even young and a sage, that's for Rabbi Yossi Aglili. The Tanakama, and the Tanakama would say, no, it had to separate them. Because it wanted to say zakein v'areta, right? Which is the drasha that the elderly person, the sage, should not, make people have to, make people go out of their way to show them honor. So that's why it had to split them up. But fundamentally, you have both criteria: elderly and a sage. That is for the Tanakama, whereas Rabbi Yossi Aglili says the sage aspect is enough by itself. Okay. So by the way, Tosfos does want to say that according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, he is bothered, which is if it's not that they're really two completely separate categories, elderly on one hand and sage on the other, if fundamentally it's just about being a sage, why did the Torah say seva altogether according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, right? According to the Tanakama, you need both. You need somebody to be old and to be a sage. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, if it's all about being a sage, why does the Torah mention seva? And Tosfos basically says, well, here's the difference. You get some points for being older. So older is not enough to demand that the person gets shown respect. They have to be a Torah sage. But let's say somebody's, an average Torah sage, not a big Talmid Chacham. So if you got an average Torah sage and they're older, then they're in the seva category. If you have somebody that's a big Talmid Chacham and young, then they're in the zakein category. Okay, but if you got somebody that's an average Talmud Chacham and young, you don't have to show them respect. Or if somebody's not a Talmud Chacham at all and they're old, they don't get respect. Okay, so it's like a point system. But the minimum requirement is you have to be a Torah sage. Okay, you have to be a Torah sage. Plus, you need some extra points. So either the extra points are because you're a big Torah sage, or the extra points are because you're older. Okay, but there's a minimum level of Torah knowledge to get you started. That's the way Tosfos explains why for Rabbi Yossi Aglili there's a Seva category and a Zaken category. Okay, and according to the Tanna Kama, you need the two of them combined. Okay, now the Gemara says like this.
There's kind of an implicit linking of, the Torah doesn't say why a person who's aged deserves any respect.
Right. Well, we're going to get to that, but right. But what were you going to say?
Well, it's a kind of an implicit understanding that one's life experience.
Right. So that's going to be the question later, right? Is it that because somebody's older, meaning is it really that Zaken means when we say the town elders, right? It means yes, it means that they're older, but it's also presumed to be leaders and people like not just random old people, right? So specific. Normally, the word elders does have that connotation of both, right? Knowledge and wisdom because of their age, but also specifically people that really, not everybody that's in that's older, just specifically people that have that sense of, particular authority or knowledge. So that's what sort of we're doing by combining the two. But you're right. Part of the idea of being older is people have life experience, life wisdom, and that demands respect. So that's what we're going to get to. Okay, the Gemara is going to particularly draw that out by Isi ben Yehuda. Okay, but I think that's a nice point to bring out now, right? Because if your basic fundamental lens is, it's all about how much Torah you know, right? So then, that sounds a little bit like how the Gemara is reading Rabbi Yossi Aglili bracketing Tosfos, right? But what, combining the two, like the Tanna Kama, is sort of saying a combination of that life experience and wisdom combined with the Torah authority, right? And that is what you're getting from the Tanna Kama. The question then is, what about just the life experience without the Torah knowledge? So that we'll get to. So now the Gemara says like this: the Tanna Kama, my taima. What's the reason of the Tanna Kama that drives the position that you have to be both? Igal Sakanai Kadama Rabbi Yossi Aglili. You think Rabbi Yossi Aglili said that Zaken is totally independent of Seva. Imkei Nichtav Rachmana, let the Torah write, Nei Seva Takum V'Hadarta. So for the Seva, you should rise and show respect. Takum V'Hadarta P'nei Zaken, and rise and show respect to the elder. Meaning, if it really was two fundamentally different categories. So Umidulo Kazivachi, since it didn't say that, and it used sort of the same verbs to refer to both of them, Shema Min Achadu. Fundamentally, it's one category: older and a sage. Okay. Amar. So you have these three possibilities, right? Older and a sage, older or a sage, which is and then or just older. Although it doesn't seem that anybody says just older, but at least Tosfos has a middle position, which is not older plus a little bit of a sage. Somewhat middle position Tosfos is working with. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this: Amar Yochi Yadrena b'Mamon. Maybe the hidur is something like lavishing the person with gifts. Talmud Lomar, Takum V'Adarta. Makim Hashem B'Chisar Kis, Afid Hashem B'Chisar Kis. The same way rising up doesn't cost you money, so it's a heater that doesn't cost you money. So the Gemara says, who told you that rising up doesn't cost money? Milo Eskina, are we not talking about a case? The Kanaki Marganisa, there you are, you're making holes in pearls, you're doing some very some type of a job that you get a very large salary for, a very large hourly salary for, and by the Hachi Bahachi and the Kaimi Kamei, so that you have to go and stop what you're doing and get and stand up, and maybe you're very much in a particular zone, and it takes you a lot of time to reorient yourself and whatever it would be. And then there's going to be an actual cost. You're going to lose, 20 minutes of your salary, which might be a lot of money. So who says that the kima does not come with a expense to it and a cost to it? So the Gemara says, Ella, here's how we know it. Akish kima lihido. We start by linking kima to honor. Mahido shein bo bitul, the same way honor does not have something that costs you to stop your work. So the rising would be a rising that does not interrupt with your work. Now, again, I don't know how we know that acts of honor don't make you have to stop the work that you're doing, but at least it's not a particular physical activity. Somebody's walking by, you could verbally say something to them to show them respect that might not cause you to stop your work. But anyway, somehow the Gemara takes that as its point of departure. Hidur, maybe it might cost you money if it means lavishing gifts, but it doesn't mean stopping to do the work that you're in the middle of. So kima doesn't mean stopping to do the work in the middle. So actually the halacha is going to emerge. But if you're in the middle of working, you don't have to stop working to rise up for somebody. Okay. And maybe you understand that it's not considered to be a disrespect. It's clear to everyone the reason you're not getting up is because you've got, you're in the middle of sawing a piece of wood or whatever. If you got, or you're underneath the sink, removing the, fixing the plumbing. That's nobody thinks it's disrespectful that you didn't get out of your fixing of the plumbing to stand up from this person, right? So it's not just that it shouldn't be come at a cost to you. It's also that in that context, the lack of standing is not an act of disrespect. So that's the first thing we conclude, that you don't have to stand if it's going to cause you to stop your work, okay? And then the next step is so therefore standing never costs you any money, so heater never costs you any money. Okay, so the Gemara says like this: my heater shemba bitul afkima shemba bitul. The same way heater, you don't stop your work. Kima, you don't stop your work. The aki shami heater lekame, and then lekima, and then we go in the reverse order. Now my kima shemba chisaron kis. Now that you don't have to stand in order to stop your work, so standing doesn't cost you money. So the way you honor is not a need that's showing money. So it does not mean lavishing gifts. It's other maybe verbal forms of honoring. It is not something about like spending money and giving gifts. Okay, Mikan Amru, and based on this they said, Ein balei umaniyot r'shayin lamo mipnei talmidei chachamim b'shat she'oskim b'mlachtan. People that are craftsmen are not allowed, I'll get back to the word, to stand in front of Torah sages when they're involved in their work. Now the closest asks, what do you mean they're not allowed? It should say they're not required to. It doesn't mean they're not allowed. So those are the two explanations. Either we're talking about they're working for other people, and therefore they're not allowed because they're stealing labor from their boss. But if so, that's a very different point than the point we were making before. So those are the other explanation is that sometimes Risha'im does not mean allowed. Sometimes Risha'im means required. And he says the better read is that this just means they're not required to stand. Okay? So when they are involved in their work. All right. Yes.
Why? Well,
yes. Now, I would imagine that because of that, if my interpretation is correct, then it's even if that standing wouldn't cost them any money. Fundamentally, it's not about they're not required that their standing come at some personal expense. What it really is that if you're osik b'mlachtan, it's not a context in which standing is expected, right? I mean, what, you don't agree?
Not necessarily, because let's say you're working for somebody else. So there are things that you are supposed to do even on the boss's time.
Right.
You don't come out of the tree to say Kriya Shema, but you
right.
Kriya Shema still.
Right.
So, maybe this is something that this could be defined as something that you have to do, even though it's on somebody else's time.
Right. So I wasn't saying that. I wasn't saying that the concern here isn't, well, first of all, it's not only limited to the case of boss. I mean, those are the two readings of Tosos. But I was saying, like, even if it's not going to be an expense to the boss, even if it's not going to be an expense to you, you're doing your own work. Okay. I don't know. You're in the middle of hammering away at you're building some cabinet. Okay. And if you stop now and show honor or whatever, then you can, it's not like you're going to lose a total amount because, you'll just make up the time later. Right. So we're not talking about there's going to be any real loss of money, but nevertheless, is that a context in which that there's an expectation in the middle of banging away at building the cabinet that, you're disrespecting me. You didn't stop your work to stand because I walked into the room. Right. That's sort of the way I read it, that in the end, the Gemara learns from it the question about chisaron kiss. But I think the logic for it is one more about whether it's a context in which standing should be like as expected. Okay, anyway. There's a test case for it. Let's say you have a case of chisaron kiss, which is not osek b'mlachtan, and let's say you have a case in which, I don't know. Let's say here's an example. Okay, you're talking to me about I'm sitting next to you and we're schmoozing and about like you're telling me that there might be a great opportunity to invest in some stock in the stock market or whatever, right? And I'm about to get that information from you, and a Zuckin walks in. I have to stand up, right? So it says, I don't have to stand up because I'm going to lose my opportunity to find out the stock tip, right? So I don't know. Would you say I don't have to stand up? Is it about chisaron kiss, right? Or is it about osek b'mlachtan? I tend to feel it's more osek b'mlachtan here. Okay. Anyway, I don't know. So the Gemara says like this. Where are we? Okay. About 5. Below, is that really, do they not have to? Vatanan, don't we teach in a Mishnah? When the people who bring Bikurim come into Yerushalayim, all the craftspeople stand up when they walk into when they come by, and they ask about their well-being. And they say to them, our brethren from such and such a place. You came all the way from Yericha or from France, wherever you came from. Come in peace. It's so wonderful to have you here in Yerushalayim, bringing your Bikurim. So you see that you have to interrupt your craft in order to do that type of a greeting. So presumably also when a elderly person, when a zakein walks in, right, a sage walks in. So I'm Rabbi Yochanan, correct. You stand up before the people who bring Bikurim, and you don't stand up before the Torah sage when you're osek b'mlachtan. So what's the difference? So the Gemara says, look, this shows you how great is a mitzvah done, in its right time. Here are people that are doing mitzvah in a very special time. This is the right time to be doing it. It doesn't come at every opportunity. It's a special opportunity. And you show particular respect to this performance of a mitzvah, more respect than you show to a Torah sage. So the Gemara says, wait, there's a different reason why that case would be special. For Dil Mashani Hasa, maybe that case is special, not because it's mitzvah b'shata, but because if you don't show them, welcoming and warmth and and respect when they come, they're going to say, I can't believe it. I slept all the way from Yericha to Yerushalayim to bring my Bikurim, and everybody was so rude to me. I walked through a town, nobody stopped to say hello. It was clear I'd been traveling for a week, right? So next time, who's going to want to schlep to Yerushalayim to bring your Bikurim? Okay, so it's a very practical reason. And anyway, but with one way or the other, it's a special case. Okay, so you don't have to interrupt your malacha. Amar Mar. Now let's go back and look what we said before. There you are in the bathhouse or sitting on the toilet, and a zaken walks in. Maybe you have to interrupt what you're doing and stand up. So the Gemara says, "V'lo, are you telling me you don't have to?" Rabbi Chia was sitting in the bathhouse. Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi, then Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, so that was the case also, he was a Nasi, right, or the son of a Nasi. He didn't stand up in the presence of Rabbi Shimon when he was in the bathhouse. Vikpin, and Rabbi Shimon was upset. The Asa, Amalei Lavu, and he went to tell his father, Rabbi, and he said to him, I can't believe this. I taught him 2/5 or 2 of the chumashim of Sefer Tehillim. I'll get back to that in a minute. Below Aman Mibanai, didn't stand in my presence, which, by the way, is very interesting, which is what type of a sage demands standing in the presence, right? Because until now, we've been talking about basically a Torah sage, somebody who's objectively a Torah sage. Now we're talking about somebody who has taught you Torah. I taught him. I'm his Rebbe. And also, this gets to that like Mishnah and Pirkei Avos, right? Which is somebody who even teaches something, hey, or anav afil Mishnah achas, even if somebody just, teaches you just one idea, they're your Rebbe, and you call them Rebbe, Alufi, Yudoi, you show them all these forms of respect. So it's like, okay, he taught him what? Like 2/5 of Tehillim, what did he do? He taught him when he was a kid how to read Psukim, did he teach him Midrashim? I mean, what level? It's not like, we're not talking about great Torah scholarship. It doesn't seem like, right? And nevertheless, I taught him something. He needs to stand before me. So it's very interesting here that it focuses in on the Rebbe-Talmud relationship. And even, again, that just teaching a small amount, it seems like, or nothing that, that necessarily super high level is enough to demand this respect. So so that's very important. So anyway, but back to our point about the bathhouse, he says, I can't believe he didn't stand before me. Okay. The two, in another case, Bar Kapara of Amile Rabbi Shmuel Bar Rabbi Yossi, Bar Kapara Rabbi Yossi, have a Yossi Bei Meschusa. They were sitting in the bathhouse. Alvaz Rabbi Shimon Bar Rabbi, the same Rabbi Shimon Bar Rabbi, was passing by. V'lo kami kamen, he didn't stand in the presence of it. He got upset. He said to his father, I told him 2/3 of a third of the Sifra of Torah's Kahanim. Okay, 2/9, I guess. But anyway, apparently Torah's Kahanim was divided into thirds, and I told him 2/3 of one section of Torah's Kahanim, which is at least a Tanaitic material. Okay, and he didn't rise up in front of me. Okay, the Amar Lo, so his father said to him, Shema ben Yoshevu Maharir. You know what? Maybe the reason they didn't stand before you is that they were chazering what they had just learned from you. So it was like they were so distracted by the Torah that was going through their head, they didn't realize you were passing by. But of course, he said it in a way like it's like dafka because of your Torah that you taught them. That's why they were so distracted and they were thinking about it that they didn't realize you were there. They didn't stand up before you. Okay. So anyway, the Gemara says, "Taima ben Yoshev Maharir." Gemara, Rebbe's defense of them was only that they were maybe too, they were their thoughts were too involved in the Torah that they were thinking about. Halav hachi, if it would not been for that, lo, he would not. They would have acted incorrectly. But it's a bathhouse. You don't have to show respect in a bathhouse. So the Gemara says no. Lo kasha. Habavate gavai, habavate b'rai. The question is, are we talking about the outer house of the bathhouse or the inner section? Right. The inner part is where everybody is naked. Where everybody is naked, everybody is fundamentally equal. And in that context, there's no idea of showing respect, okay? It's not a social context in which respect, that type of respect for status, is not, basic human respect is necessary, but the respect for status isn't appropriate, okay? So that's in the inner bathhouse. In the outer part, where people are sitting like half clothed or whatever it might be, that's where it is appropriate still to show respect, okay? And that's where this was taking place. And the Gemara says, you know what? That actually makes sense that they were in the outer room. So how else were they thinking in Torah? What was Rebbe's response? Oh, they were thinking in Torah. How would they be thinking in Torah if they were in the inner room and they were naked? So clearly, the whole event took place in the outer room, and that's why he was expecting some respect. So the Gemara says, no, you know what? Maybe they were in the inner room, and they still, maybe sometimes your head is so involved in, what you've been learning and thinking about that you can't stop yourself thinking in Torah, even when you're in the bathroom, and you can't stop yourself, even when you go into the inner room of the bathhouse. So the fact that Rabbi said maybe they were thinking about Torah doesn't prove that they were in the outer room. They could have been in the inner room, and Rabbi could have said they can't help their thoughts. They're so involved in the Torah that they've been learning. Okay, but anyway, what's fascinating about this is, besides reiterating the point about the bathhouse as a place you don't show respect, not you show disrespect, but you don't have the need of respect for these social status, is the idea that we now have the Rebbe idea, the Zaken idea, specifically in a Rav-Talmud relationship, and again, even around something that's not the most intense or form of Talmud Torah, not something like your Rabbo Mufak. It's sort of like your Rebbe who malamdo davar echad type of a model. By the way, an interesting parenthetical point about what's two chumashim in Sefer Tehillim. Look at this Tosfos, Shnei Chumashim. Tosfos says, Pirish B'Kuntras Lashon Chomesh, a fifth HaSefer. So it means 2/5 of Sefer Tehillim. Yesh Mefarshim, Chamisha Chumashim Yeshbo. No, the same way the Torah has 5 books, which we call Chumashim. There are 5 books of Sefer Tehillim, 5 Chumashim. Okay, what do you know? Kamo b'shel Torah. Ashrei ha'ish. It starts by Tehillim Perek Aleph. It's book number 1. Ka'ayot harog al afikei mayim. Perek Memtet is book. Membet is book. Begins book number 2. Ach tov l'Yisrael. Perek Ayin Gimel is book number 3. Tfilah l'Moshe Tzadi is book number 4. Yomru Goali is Kuv Zayin is book number 5. Now, how does Tosfos know to divide it in those ways? So Tosfos says, listen to this. L'kol echad min asfarim elu misayim be'amein. At the end of each one of those sections, there's the word amen, right? At the end, the levad mina achro shu sof tilim, not at the very end of the last one, because that's the end of tilim. You don't need a word to break it up. But actually, there are, I don't know, I didn't do a Bar Ilan search. I don't know if there are only 4 amens in Sefer Tilim, but it is, why one tilim ends with amen and nothing else does? So Tosfos says the amen isn't the end of that parak, it's the end of a whole section. And to actually see Tilim is broken up into 5 sections. Very interesting.
That is related probably to why we look at Zimra when we finish the end of Tehillim, the last Hallelujah.
Well, Amen. Right. It's a way of sort of showing a conclusion. Yeah. So somebody can now do a Bar Ilan search and see if there's more than just those 4 amens and Sefer Tehillim. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. Maybe you should close your eyes, and you're allowed to close your eyes and pretend you don't see your Rebbe, and you don't have to stand. So the Gemara says, what? No, we're talking about wicked people. Like your Rebbe enters the room, you have a chiyuv to stand. So what? So maybe you're just going to pretend you're not obligated. So why do I need a pasuk to tell me that you can't try to fool people and get out of an obligation that you have? So the Gemara says, no. Maybe what you should do is close your eyes before the time of obligation comes. Meaning, you know your Rebbe is going to be coming into this room any minute. You hear him in the hallway outside the base medrash. So what you do is you situate yourself in the base medrash in a place where don't have a line of sight. So when he walks into the room, you won't be seeing him and you won't have a chiyuv to them. So technically, you're not obligated because you actually technically did not see him enter the room. Okay, so in that case, no, you have to fear God. So you cannot sort of, manipulate it. It's so, and obviously, because, since he's entering the room, I mean, it actually raises an interesting question, which is, did you really get out of the obligation? Is really like, I don't know, if a blind person knows that their Rebbe has entered, without seeing it, he's still chayav. The awareness, right, is presumably enough without the seeing, right? So is it that you maybe, but so is the problem here that you didn't really get out of the obligation? No, technically you did get out of the obligation, but you're not allowed to manipulate it so that you get out of the obligation.
Okay. Side of that earlier story when the person hears his mother's footsteps coming.
Oh, right. He said the Shekhinah's coming and he's preparing, and here it's like avoiding. That's a nice contrast, right? Okay. Okay. So you would manipulate it so that when the time of obligation comes, you don't see him. The kamei that you should have to rise up. Talmud Lomar, takum yareta, rise up and fear God. Tana, ezu kima sheish bahidur. What is a type? I'm sorry. Talmud Lomar takum yareta. That's the end of the previous one. Takum yareta teaches you that you have to fear God in your standing. You can't manipulate the situation. Okay. Tana, ezu kima sheish bahidur. What's a rising that shows honor? Have you rising up within 4 amot, right? Then somebody's right there and you show them and like you're connecting to them in your rising, right? It's not just, what?
Like within 4 amot of them? Or
of you.
You're going up?
No, within 4 amot of you. So if they're at the opposite end of the room, presumably there's 2 things that's accomplished when they're closer to you. If they're at the opposite end of the room, it's not as obvious that you're rising because of them. And when when they're in your zone, it's clear it's because of them. And also when you rise in their presence, it's a way of giving them directly that respect, right? You're showing it, directly to them. So therefore it's within the Arba Amot. Okay, so Amar Bai, Lo Amin Elabid Rabo She'eno Mufhak. This is only by the master who's not your like prime teacher. Your I would say expert, but expert isn't the right word. Anyway, your primary teacher. But Rabo Mufhak, the one who is your primary teacher, Male Einav, as long as he's within eyesight. Now I find this fascinating because we just got saying that the true heater comes when they're in your space, that actually it's not as much of an act of respect when they're far away. So why, but on the other hand, it's like, there's the opposite argument, which is if my Rebbe is anywhere nearby, if I can even see my Rebbe, how can I remain seating as I'm seeing my Rebbe? So the act of rising in a way, is not as much, doesn't show as much direct respect because it's not clearly connected, but it's like, I can't not be standing if he's anywhere within my eyesight. So it's interesting. You sort of lose the power of the act of rising for the need to be standing when he is, but the act itself is not that. So it's this interesting thing. So we're going to see that part of it is also that you don't get to sit down until he leaves completely from your eyes. So you remain standing. So, the act itself might not be the immediate same degree of showing of respect, but the remaining standing until he's out of your eyesight is also part of it. Yes.
The dynamic between the honor you're according him and the midah you're cultivating within yourself.
That's interesting. So like what is it? So and why more that meat in the case of your Rebbe rather than in you mean just because like what would it mean that I've received so much from him?
Be aware of the fact that you're standing when he's half a block away.
Right.
But when you stand within his Daled Amos, that's clearly directed towards him.
Right.
But the other one is.
But if I've received so much for him, what would it mean for me? Right. That's an interesting way of framing it. What would it mean for me in this context not to be responding?
Acknowledge this.
Not to know. I know he's around, and for me not to be responding. That's a very nice way. Yes.
I don't know if there's an aspect of like recognize your Rebbe from farther away also, right?
That's interesting.
Them to come close, and like they might not know that you're standing for them because they don't know you and they don't know that you know them, and like it makes more sense that they're right in front
somebody
of you.
Could feel the rising is for them more once that connection exists.
Right.
So
whereas your Rebbe knows who you are and knows like why you're standing for them and like.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. It's like you see a friend that you know from across the block, right? Like, hey. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because if you don't wave, it's like, what, he doesn't recognize me or whatever.
He doesn't know you very well.
Right.
Do that thing where they look behind you,
that's an interesting thought too. Okay, those are really interesting, good thoughts. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Okay. Okay. Abaye Michia v'chazi le'udnei dechamed Rabbi Yosef the Asi, when Abaye would see the ear of the donkey of Rabbi Yosef came into his field of vision, so he so much recognized him. He recognized his donkey's ear. So Havaykoim, he would stand up. Okay, that's how careful he was about his Rebbe. Abaye had a rachiv chamra. Now Abaye himself was riding a donkey. The kamaski aguda dinahar, and he was walking on the riverbank. Sagin, he was walking and he was like riding along on the riverbank. Excuse me. Yazir Misharsha of Rabban B'idach and Misharsha and other rabbis were on the other side of the river. Below Kamim Mikabeh, and they didn't stand up when they saw Abaye on his side of the river. He wasn't in their Arba Amos, but he was in their eyesight. Amar Lahu. Lav Rabbu Muvakana. I don't understand. I'm not your primary teacher. How did you not stand? Amrulay, they said to him, Lava Daitin. Ugh, you're right. We weren't paying attention. Okay, which actually does point out an interesting thing, because if somebody isn't immediately in your zone, you're not necessarily aware when they're, even if they're in your, technically you're in my eyesight, but it could be like I somewhat degree see that who you are, but I'm not registering it because my focus is right now about this picnic we're having, so I'm not like fully registering what's going on the other side, right? But anyway, so that's part of the challenge here. Maybe part of the message also is that it has to be a daitin. Like if you see your Rebbe even far away, that's part of the kavod. Is that you it makes an impression on you even if you're at a distance and doing something else. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this: Rabbi Shimon Lezer Omer, Minayin lezakein shelo yatriach. Talmud Loma zakein v'yareit. At the end of this brayta, how do you know not to put a weight on other people? So you have to do your own to not to minimize people's obligation, which is not the same as being mochel on the kavod, but avoiding circumstances, as we'll see. Amar Abaye, again, Abaye has a lot to say about this sugya. Naktina, we take the position the makif chaye. That if you go around, so you don't have to go into a place where a lot of people are and force them to stand for you, you take a, you take a detour to avoid that, you'll live a long life. That's a very good thing. So again, it's interesting. Abaye, and now we're going to have a story about Abaye himself, right? The same Abaye who was upset that his students didn't stand at the opposite side of the river. It's not like Abaye was going around demanding and being makpid on his kavod, because here's the next story. Abaye makif. Abaye would go around places where he knew that there were people that would rise up before him. He didn't want to put himself in situations where people had to stand for him. Okay, so Rabbi Zera makif. Rabbi Zera would go around. Ravina have a Yosef Kamid Rabbi Yirmiyah Midifti. Ravina was sitting in front of Yirmiyah Midifti. Chalafahu Gavra Kamei V'lo Michsi Reisha. So since we talk about passing by somebody, so here's another story which is not exactly related, but anyway, a certain person was passing by and he didn't have his head covered. Once again, with the head covering, right? We've had that before. Amar Kama Chatzif Hay Gavra. How much chutzpah does this person have that he's walking in the presence of rabbis and he's not covering his head? So Amalei Dilma Mimasa Mechasya Nihu. The Gisi Bar Rabbanan, maybe he's from the place of Masa Mechasya, that they are very sort of uncomfortable terms with their rabbis, and therefore they haven't learned to cover their head in the presence of their rabbis. So that's very interesting Gemara. Like, what's the Gemara exactly getting at, right? So one wonders if, why is this story relevant? I mean, you could say it's a combination that Hidur is not just rising up, right? That's what we've been focusing. Kima is rising up. Hidur is other ways of showing respect. So maybe under certain societal norms, a way of showing respect is you have your head covered in the presence of a rabbi. And here it's saying, in a society, they don't do that. But I think that the other point is exactly this tension that I've been talking about being mochel on your kavod, which the Gemara was conflicted about, and not putting people in unnecessary circumstances to show you kavod. So this society, the rabbis basically were mochel on their kavod. It's okay, you can have your head uncovered in my presence. And that's not such a good thing, right? Because then you maybe don't learn to show the respect that's due to rabbis. And then you go to another society and it's seen as an affront, right? Another type of a community. So there's, I think, like a little, to me, I hear like a little criticism, maybe you hear something else. Maybe it's okay. The rabbis in that community are all right with it. I don't know. I hear a little criticism. I hear a difference between being mochel on your kavod and no. When Abaye was walking and there were students and they weren't showing him his kavod, he was makpid. You guys have to show me the kavod, but that doesn't mean I go around asking for it. I actually try to avoid it. But when we're in those circumstances, I'm not mochel. You need to show respect. That's part of kavod HaTorah. So I think it's that interesting balance between being mochel and letting somebody get away with not showing respect, as opposed to not trying to, trying to avoid situations which makes people have to show the respect. Yes.
How are the family members supposed to act?
So we're going to get to that,
yeah.
like a father and a son,
Yeah,
whatever.
right.
Okay, let's try to just turn the page. I know it's already 8:30, but I need to be not more than 1 hour behind. Okay, so the Gemara says like this: Easy ben Yudah Omer, any older person, right? Not only a sage. We rule like that, so that's important. Included in respect is respect for old age. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan would get up in front of older non-Jews, right? The Arameans, meaning not only a Jew, any old person. Amar kama harpataki adu alayu dahani. How many life events, life circumstances have passed over this person? Right, so the very fact of the wisdom and experience and travails that a person has endured, through their life, that itself, that age and that life experience demands respect. Very powerful statement. Rava mikim lokai. Now, interestingly, the Rava would not rise up. Maybe he felt that would compromise his, Torah honor. That it is true. There is a reality of life experience, but that doesn't mean that a Torah sage rises up to somebody who that's all they have is just that life experience. So he himself wouldn't rise up. Mikim lokai, hidur avilu. He would do some form of respect. According to Rashi, that would be lifting himself a little bit off the chair. Okay, Abaye, Yoiv Yadu Lasabe. Abaye would give his hand to an older person. He'd have an older person lean on him. He'd help the older person cross the street. He would show this respect and give his own personal service, this big Torah sage. Rava did not go that far. He was trying to balance it with Torah honor, apparently. And Meshader Shluche, he'd have his servant help out the old person, but he wouldn't do it himself. Right? So it's an interesting balance that we're trying to strike. Rav Nachman Meshader Guzai. Rav Nachman would also send some of his attendants. Amar Ilav Torah, if it were not for my Torah, Kama Nachman Bar Abba, there's a lot of Nachmans that are out there. So what, I'm just like any other Nachman? Everybody has to show respect to an older person, but I also represent Torah. So I can't compromise the Torah that I represent, because at the end of the day, that is something that demands more respect than just old age. So it's very fascinating. On the one hand, we're saying old age on itself does demand respect in terms of wisdom and life experiences, but that's not at the same level of Torah. So does that mean that nevertheless you should be mochel on your Torah kavod, going back to that issue, and show respect to, and do it yourself? Or do you find some type of a balance, which is what Rav is finding? Amar Rab Ivo, now we'll just turn the page. Amar Rab Yanai, where are we? Ein Talmid Chacham Rishai Lamot Mipnei Rabo Ela Shacharit V'Arvit. Kidei Shelo Yeh Kvodo Meruba Mikvod Shamayim. That you're not allowed to, or Tosfos says you don't have to stand up for your Rebbe more than twice a day, because you only pray to God, right? Pray to God 3 times a day, but presumably he's talking about Kvod Shamayim is presumably Kriyat Shema. Okay, so therefore, you don't have to do more than Rashi says. Again, I don't know what that means, because there's also mincha, unless we're talking about kriyat shema. Okay, but to some degree, you did this. Maybe it just means you daven. If you daven mincha and mariv at the same time, so you have davening in the morning and a davening at the end of the day. Okay, so anyway, so you don't have to show more respect to your Rebbe more than you do to God. Now the question is, does that mean just because if your Rebbe's around the whole time, like if you're in the same yeshiva with your Rebbe, it's like if there's a lightning storm, how many times are you going to make the bracha on lightning, right? So that might be the context, as opposed to if somebody drops by at 5 times in the day, but you're not around them the whole time, maybe you have to stand each time. But maybe it means there's a constant presence, like with you and God, right? Then it's only morning and the evening, and that frames the whole day as a way of showing respect, and not every time they enter the room. Okay, so we'll pick up with that discussion tomorrow.
What about old women? Is there any discussion?
Oh.